And first of all, I would like to invite Bartlomiej Kozek from UNEP Grid Poland to start his presentation. Yeah, the presentation is now on, and I think everything is working. The microphone is on, the camera is on.
Great.
You're on. The floor is yours, Bartlomiej.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Well, we will be talking about the European context right now, because it's a really important and relevant context in terms of thinking about both sustainability, ecology, climate change, and also the circular economy as well, because these issues are intertwined with each other, and I will try to talk about it a bit more in my presentation. Just to give you a short information about who we are. We are an NGO working since 1991 in Poland, promoting the work of UN environmental program. And I've seen in the previous presentation that there were some illustrations, for example, from the publications of the International Resource Panel, also created by UNEP. So it's really nice to see that the work coming from UNEP and its affiliate structures is also seen and promoted and seen as a relevant and important source of knowledge about the state of the global environment. So this is what we are also doing here in Poland, promoting the work of UN environmental program in various ways, including taking part in discussions and conferences such as this one. So my name is Bartlomiej Kozek, and I'm the Sustainable Development Specialist in the UNEP Grid Warsaw Center. And for me, one of the most important issues with which I come and discuss environmental issues is their holistic approach. The approach that incorporates also social and economic thinking in terms of environmental protection. It's something I've been working before this current job and at my job currently, because one of the sources of knowledge and one of the sources of actions of which you may be aware of are the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you can see, these are 17 Sustainable Development Goals created, promoted by the United Nations. And these are the goals that aim to give purpose and meaning towards the development work of economies and countries across the world. These are not goals that are limited purely, for example, to the global south, as the previous millennial development goals were, but these are goals that are meant to guide the whole humanity till 2030. And it's important also to note that they themselves show the need for a holistic approach. I will be talking about climate change, but you can already see relevant issues regarding sustainable cities, regarding responsible consumption and production, which is also directly connected to the idea and practice of circular economy. So you can't have just one goal without the other, because creating this passing a single goal without passing others does not mean sustainable development. So it's also important to bear that in mind, and I will be showcasing this further on. So one of the sources of information, the trends that guide global development, that guide global policies enacted or discussed at the national and global levels, is the climate crisis. And you can see the scale of the challenge on this symbolic bar. Each bar in this scheme shows a single year, and the blue bars are the ones, this is, I think, the bar for Poland. The blue bars show the years in which the temperature in a territory was lower than the average for the whole century, or even a bit further. And the red ones are the ones in which the average temperature in a single year was warmer than the average for this century. And it clearly shows that with each year we are coming right from the past to the present, the temperature is getting warmer and warmer. This is a source, this is connected to anthropological challenges and the issues regarding industrial revolutions, using more and more fossil fuels for humanity's development, which gave us unprecedented levels of development, but also created a new trend, a new negative trend, that is the rise of the average global temperature. And there are quite a lot of series of studies regarding them, regarding this issue. And right now, the scientific consensus is that we need to limit the growth, the average growth of the global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius in comparison with these pre-industrial levels. And currently, as we can see, we are already having a temperature that is 1.1 degree warmer than this pre-industrial age. And it already can be seen that it's this rise of temperature is not a thermostat. We just turn the dial and it's a bit warmer. It shows that the equilibrium that was a part of the global ecosystem is starting to shift and starting to change, and the whole ecosystem is starting to maybe not disintegrate, but working way in a much more unpredictable manner. And basically each and every year we hear about unprecedented either weather patterns or other serious issues regarding, for example, bushfires in Australia, fires in the Amazon, fires in California, like this year. So there are changes that we can see, and they already influence not only just the state of the environment, but also human well-being. They have a huge economic toll, and they have radically lessened the quality of life of people affected. Like if you can see on orange, the photos of orange skies in California, then you can see that, well, it's not normal, and you wouldn't want to live in such a world. So it's important to note this, because most of the human activities currently are still based on fossil fuels. And packaging is sadly no different, but it also offers an opportunity of change. But in order to change, we need to know about the scale of this challenge. And the scale of this challenge is unprecedented in terms of like humanity itself. UNEP creates each year a report, the emissions gap report, and we can see that with current contributions of different member states of the UN, arguing that they will limit CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions by X, you would have a global warming of 3 degrees, and it's way past this 3.2 to be exact. And this is way past the limit, the 1.5 threshold, even the 2 threshold, the 2 degrees Celsius warming that was the consensus previously. So in order for us to limit the amounts of greenhouse gas emissions coming not only from the energy sector, we need to also remind ourselves about that, because emissions are not only from the energy sector, they also come from transport, buildings, from the industry, and also even from agriculture. And the scale of this challenge is unprecedented. And the more we wait for this challenge to go away, but it won't, the less time we have for this challenge. Because, for example, as UNEP shows, if we would start concrete climate action in the last decade, then we would need to limit the greenhouse gas emissions per year just by 3.3% each year. But we didn't. So as you can see, the greenhouse gas emissions rose. It rose more or less 1.5% per year. It's an average. And thanks to that, right now, if we would want to limit the global rise of the average temperature to 1.5 degrees, we would need to cut emissions by 7.6% each year. It's a huge challenge. The current pandemic shows that radical change is possible, because current estimates show that maybe we had a drop in CO2 emissions by 8%. But we can also see that if we do this in a rapid way, because we need to save ourselves from the pandemic, then of course it's not the ideal quality of life in a default setting that we would like to see for us in the future. So it's important to plan and to think about the future. And I will be talking about ways in which the European Union also plans to incorporate it in its in the policies that it enacts or plans to enact. But before we do that, we need to also think about other ways in which we can act, and these different types of partnerships, public-private partnerships, partnerships between businesses, partnerships of global cities, can also be a way through this crisis, because being the climate avant-garde can create either market niches for the companies that take part in climate-friendly activities. They can, of course, influence their PR and the way the consumers see them, because we know that not only in Poland, and even more visibly seen in Western Europe or in North America, the environmental awareness of people is starting to rise more and more, and they want to have high quality of life without harming the environment or harming it as less as possible. So these partnerships show the leaders of the climate change in their respective sectors, either the business sector or, for example, the city sector. And even we in the UNEP Grid Warsaw Center are promoting such a partnership that is climate leadership. We had a first edition this year, and first 10 companies decided to partake on a very wide range of climate-friendly activities, from using more recycled material in their packaging, so up to promoting giving a second life to mobile phones by giving them back to a company, and the company could, for example, reuse it, resell it, or recycle, depending on the quality of the mobile phone. But besides the business sector and the city sector, it's really important to also bear in mind that it's not just a fashion, the care about the environment. We know that environmental awareness rose even from the 70s in the 20th century, and especially after the last crisis, the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, there is a huge push towards incorporating environmental protection with economic development, not only growth, because there is a huge discussion about limits of growth and whether or not growth as itself is sustainable in the long term. I won't venture into that, but in terms of incorporating the environment and the economy to create a green economy that's also socially just. So if you can see, there were works of think tanks such as the British New Economics Foundation, even in 2008, thinking about the Green New Deal. This is one of the terms that currently is quite fashionable, especially in the United States. We've seen work of UNEP, we've seen school strikes, and especially the climate youth that are really going to the streets and wanting a better life for themselves and wanting this change that also incorporates creating new sustainable consumption and production patterns. So let's see what Europe is doing currently. And we know that the most important umbrella under which these new environmental activities are performed is the European Green Deal. It's also important to notice that after 2019, the European elections, we've seen in many countries of Europe, not all of them, of course, but in quite a lot of them, a sort of green wave in which parties that were more environmentally conscious and ambitious gained seats in the European Parliament. And also, a new European Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, the chair of the European Commission, embarked on an ambitious strategic vision that on the one hand, tries to incorporate climate science. As you can see on this slide, you can see the IPCC report, after which the climate movement regained its strength in recent months. And also, it turned out that the new European Commission decided that creating a sustainable economy on the continent-wide scale is one of their priorities. So we now know that one of the priorities of this commission is to create to reach the goal of climate neutrality of the European Union until 2050. But also it is really important to notice that these are not like new things, that the European Union has had environmental policies from quite a long time regarding air quality, regarding trying to incorporate some environmental standards in the common agricultural policy, because right now this is one of the elements of a huge debate over the directions in which this policy also needs to go for the future. But we see on the one hand there are facts, and on the other hand these are activities that the European Union wants to pursue, and even they were announced, for example, at COP25 summit, climate summit in Katowice in 2018, a wide range of activities, amongst which we can see a circular economy as a really important factor in limiting the emissions, because if we create products that are more energy efficient, then we limit the use of fossil fuels. If they are more resource efficient, because this is another part of the equation, then we also have less environmental destruction and less fossil fuel use, and therefore less greenhouse gas emissions. So joining different parts of the policy sector and the policy spectrum is a really important part of thinking in terms of the European Green Deal. In recent weeks, we've heard about an idea of a renovation wave in Europe to thermal insulate buildings, residual buildings, for example. And you can see that these policies are not in a silo. When we think about buildings, we think just about buildings. When we think about agriculture, we think just in terms of agriculture. There is a huge policy integration for the need of sustainable development. And it's a really important goal and a really important thing to have in mind. So as I said, climate neutrality by 2015 is one of the goals. We are also having a discussion about raising the emissions reduction goal to 2030. It was on 40%. Last year, we were thinking about 55%. Recently, there was a vote in the European Parliament in which the Parliament asked for a 60% reduction, like we're saying, about in a span of 10 years. So these are ambitious goals. They will be a challenge for some economies, but on the other hand, as we've seen in the discussions regarding the current multi-annual financial framework for the future, for the post-corona fund, the climate issues and the financing of climate issues and climate investments up to the fund for just transition is a huge element of European thinking right now. And there will be tons of policies that are either currently worked at, or are planned, or even were published already, that will be relevant for the circular economy sector, will be relevant also for the packaging sector. And I think, for example, the European Union industrial strategy, the idea of creating a border adjustment tax, the strategy regarding the chemicals sector are all documents that are or policy proposals that are planned and will have a huge influence on A, the ways of thinking in terms of sustainable development, and B, will probably translate to more or less ambitious climate policies and policies that will have influence on the industry. Of course, the European Commission has its plans, the European Parliament has its ambitions. In the end, it will be a sort of a compromise between these institutions and nation states, but we need to know that this is the direction, and it's important also for the industry to know that this is not just a fad, and after a few months the European Union will say, no, this was boring and let's start something else. This will be a trend that will be influencing businesses and their behavior for years to come. And even before the European Green Deal, we had really important policy announcements and strategy announcements that showed this quite directly. Because, for example, in 2018, if I'm correct, there was a EU bioeconomy strategy, and this wasn't the first bioeconomy strategy. There was a previous one earlier in the decade, and as you can see, there is a view of showing that the bioeconomy can be a source of economic development, of creating new jobs and creating a competitive industry, competitive European industry that can compete on the global scale with other business actors from around the globe. So as even in such a strategy, you can see this integration in the spirit of sustainable development. It's not only about creating new products that are environmentally friendly, although it's of course a very important thing to have in mind, but it's also an opportunity to create new jobs, which may be especially right now important after the post-pandemic recovery, which hopefully, let's hope it will happen as soon as possible. And of course, the important issue of fossil fuels, not only in the environmental terms, but also in terms of energy import. The fact that Europe is energy dependent, it needs to import mainly the fossil fuels it uses. So reducing fossil fuel use is not only important in terms of fighting the climate crisis, but also in terms of creating a sense of even economic security, because also we are now more and more thinking about terms of not only in terms of competitiveness, but also in terms of safety, even in terms of reshoring some industries, such as the medical sector, back to Europe, which will be a challenge, but it's already starting to be discussed during this pandemic, which, as we've heard, changes quite a lot of things. And the bioeconomy is especially important for the European Union because it's a source of jobs, it's a source of added value, it's a source of a large turnover. We can see it employs 18 million people across the continent, across the European Union. And if we see the bio-based chemicals and pharmaceuticals, plastics and rubber, this is a relatively small sector in terms of employment, but it creates proportionately quite a lot of value added in terms of the European economy. For example, if you compare it with the agricultural sector, which is way bigger in terms of employment, but does not create as much proportionately value added as the bio-based chemicals sector, for example. And even in this bioeconomy strategy, the European Union showcased examples of such a bioeconomy of the future, especially the ones that were financed by the European Union. And one of them is the Res Urbis project, which uses, for example, organic waste to create bioplastics and bioplastics that can be used in, for example, in packaging. So it's a really different way of it's a way of using alternative materials that can be less harmful to the climate and to the environment, but still offer the benefits of packaging that we were discussing earlier during this the introductory speech. And of course, there is a EU plastic strategy, and it also is an important thing to think about, not only in terms of what it does, because it's aimed at limiting the use of single-use plastics or to promote recycling, as we know. But on the other hand, it's really important in terms of how it's been developed. It showed how policy changes can become quite rapid, and also the industry needs to be prepared for them, because this were a part of a social uproar after one of the documentaries, I think that was from David Attenborough, showing the scourge of plastics in the oceans that were dumped in the oceans, and what it did to wildlife. And it showed that in a few months, the policy towards plastics and the push towards making them more sustainable can be a very powerful policy tool. And I would say that at least part of the industry was taken by surprise by it. And so it's really important to note that this will not be a patient wait in which we will like transform in a matter of like years, and we will just adapt by promoting a bit more recycling. There is a huge push and a huge need to change these production and consumption patterns, also coming from the consumers, and just blaming consumers for their the ways of whether or not they are recycling can be a double-edged sword, because the consumers may get furious for the industry and its practices. So it's really important to bear that in mind, also in terms of purely economic profit, and in terms of the way in which people and consumers see such sectors as plastics production, for example. And this all leads us to the idea of the circular economy itself, which shows that for years we have been thinking about recycling, but we need to get more and more ambitious. We need to rethink, what do we need to package at all? How can we package it? How can we produce these packages? How can we design these packages to be as much efficient as possible? How to use alternative resources? There is, of course, a need for experimentation. Sometimes the ones that are experimenting will fail. Sometimes the ones that will be experimenting will have huge successes. It's important because, for example, when we were talking about the EU plastic strategy, there was the whole issue regarding oxy-biodegradable plastics, which theoretically are degradable, but because consumers not always knew the fact that they're, of course, degradable, but only industrial facilities, then the whole issue regarding plastic pollution still was visible. So there will be a lot of work to do. There is a real need for the EU also to help it, not only in terms of policy, but financing such projects as the Resurbis one about which I was talking about. But right now, recently, we've seen a circular economy action plan. And like you can see, it's focusing on reducing over packaging. It's focusing on redesigning. It's focusing on recycling. So it's focusing on the whole circular economy package, not only in terms of recycling, but also in terms of the harm towards the environment coming from unsustainable plastics production and consumption, also by consumer use. But it's also focusing on opportunities coming from the bio-based plastics, from biodegradable or compostable plastics, especially the ones that are not creating the microplastics problem. And it, of course, tries to show the opportunities in terms of jobs, in terms of competitiveness of the industries and the companies themselves that are that would benefit from this change if it would happen on a wide scale. So we will need climate leaders, and that's something with which I would like to leave you. And I'm very grateful for having this opportunity to talk to you. And if you have any questions, then later on I could try to answer at least part of them. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the second presentation.